From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I strongly urge our nation's states and cities and counties to consider carefully the harm they are doing to their citizens by refusing to enforce our immigration laws and to rethink these policies.
In the latest crackdown on sanctuary cities, Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordered all cities to work with federal immigration agents or risk losing billions of dollars in grants to law enforcement agencies. We'll speak to city council members from Austin and Philadelphia on their plans to fight back against the Trump administration. We'll also look at how activists and lawyers in New Haven, Connecticut, successfully fought back a decade ago against ICE over immigration raids launched after New Haven adopted the first municipal ID card in the nation. Then we speak to the acclaimed writer Rebecca Solnit about resistance, hope, the fight against climate change, and her new book, a follow-up to her bestseller, Men Explain Things to Me.
Yeah, Men Explain Things to Me came about because all my life men would explain things to me that they didn't necessarily know better than I did, and sometimes I knew much better than they did, because there was this assumption that because of gender, they were just inherently knowledgeable and superior and in control, and I was inherently ignorant and in need of an injection of their knowledge, wisdom, insight, etc.
Rebecca Solnit on the mother of all questions. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Top Democratic lawmakers are demanding House Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes recuse himself from investigating ties between Trump and Russia. Amidst revelations, Nunes met with a source on the grounds of the White House and viewed secret U.S. intelligence reports one day before Nunes went to the White House to supposedly brief President Trump about the reports. Nunes claims the secret reports indicate Trump or his associates might have been incidentally swept up in surveillance carried out by U.S. spy agencies as they conducted foreign surveillance. Nunes did not share the secret reports with fellow committee members and has not to this day. Some Democrats, such as California Congressmember Jackie Speier, have called on Nunes to step down as chair. Democrats say the meeting shows Nunes, who formerly served on Trump's transition team, is too close to Trump to be impartial in the investigation about whether Trump's campaign colluded with Russia in order to influence the 2016 election. Nunes is refusing to recuse himself from the investigation. The House Intelligence Committee has canceled all meetings this week amidst the ongoing turmoil. This is California Democratic Congressmember Adam Schiff.
I think it would be worthwhile for the chairman to recuse himself from any investigation involving either the Trump campaign or the Trump transition. There's nothing normal about what's taken place over the last week. It's certainly not normal to go and receive information as the chairman of a committee that you can't share with your own committee members, but you go and share with the president, particularly if the investigation involves associates of the president.
Earlier this month, Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from any investigations into ties between Trump and Russia during the 2016 campaign, following revelations he met twice with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. while serving as a campaign surrogate for Donald Trump. Details have emerged about a December meeting between President Trump's close advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the head of a U.S.-sanctioned Russian state bank known as VEB. President Obama imposed the sanctions in 2014 over Russia's military actions in Ukraine. The bank disclosed the meeting on Monday and said Kushner was acting as the head of Kushner Companies. This information contradicts the statements of White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, who said Kushner was acting as a Trump advisor during the meeting, not as a private developer. The revelations came on the same day Kushner agreed to testify to the Senate committee investigating ties between the Trump campaign and Russia during the 2016 election. Mayors across the country say they'll fight back against Attorney General Jeff Sessions' threats that sanctuary cities will lose federal funding unless the cities require local police cooperate with federal immigration agents carrying out Trump's mass deportation plans. On Monday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordered all cities to comply or risk losing billions of dollars in grants to law enforcement agencies.
Today, I'm urging states and local jurisdictions to comply with these federal laws, including 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. Moreover, the Department of Justice will require that jurisdictions seeking or applying for Department of Justice grants to certify compliance with 1373 as a condition of receiving those awards.
New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, Boston Mayor Martin Walsh, and others vowed Monday to defy the order and remain sanctuary cities. In more immigration news, more than 600 companies have already submitted bids to build Trump's expanded wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. All bids are due by Wednesday. During the campaign, Trump vowed Mexico would pay for the border wall, but his 2018 budget instead calls for allocating $2.6 billion for the wall's construction. Meanwhile, in Chicago, an agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement known as ICE shot and injured 53-year-old Felix Torres after the agents burst into the family's home Monday morning. His daughter, Carmen Torres, says the family was sleeping when agents burst through the front door. She said, quote, "They just came in and pointed pistols in our faces and dragged us out. We didn't even have time to dress or grab milk for the baby." Unquote. Felix Torres was hospitalized in serious condition after the shooting. ICE says he was not the man they were seeking to arrest. We'll have more on immigration and sanctuary cities after headlines. President Trump's expected to sign an executive order today to dismantle a slew of climate rules put in place by President Obama. The executive order will instruct the Environmental Protection Agency to review Obama's rules limiting power plant emissions, the first step to the regulation's eventual elimination. The order is also expected to direct the Interior Department to lift Obama's moratorium, halting new coal leases on federal land. The Bureau of Land Management will be instructed to review regulations limiting fracking or hydraulic fracturing. Obama's regulations limiting methane emissions will be dismantled. The executive order is also expected to end President Obama's 2013 Climate Action Plan, which outlined the federal government's approach to curbing climate change. Environmental groups are vowing to fight the executive order. Protests are planned for this afternoon in Washington, D.C. The United States led a boycott of UN talks on outlawing nuclear weapons Monday. Despite the boycott, more than 100 nations did take part in the widely supported talks, although none of the participating countries possess nuclear weapons. This is the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley.
You are going to see almost 40 countries that are not in the General Assembly today. And that's 40 countries that are saying, in this day and time, we would love to have a ban on nuclear weapons. But in this day and time, we can't honestly say that we can protect our people by allowing the bad actors to have them, and those of us that are good trying to keep peace and safety not to have them.
The Pentagon announced Monday it'll be sending at least 240 more U.S. soldiers to northern Iraq within the next 36 hours. The troops are from the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Heavy fighting continues in West Mosul, despite reports over the weekend that the U.S.-backed Iraqi army had suspended its offensive amidst revelations U.S.-led coalition airstrikes have killed hundreds of people in recent weeks. One U.S.-led coalition airstrike on March 17th may have killed up to 200 civilians, marking one of the deadliest strikes since the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003. On Monday, Amnesty International accused Iraqi officials of telling Mosul residents not to flee amidst the airstrikes and ground offensive, instead dropping leaflets and broadcasting over the radio that civilians should stay in their houses. Amnesty said, quote, "The fact that Iraqi authorities repeatedly advise civilians to remain at home instead of fleeing the area indicates that coalition forces should have known that these strikes were likely to result in a significant number of civilian casualties. Disproportionate attacks and indiscriminate attacks violate international humanitarian law and can constitute war crimes," Amnesty said. The Wall Street Journal is reporting the Trump administration has increased its military support for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates amidst the ongoing Saudi-led war in Yemen. Citing unnamed U.S. and Arab officials, the Journal reports the U.S. will now offer even more logistical and intelligence support for the coalition fighting. Yemen's Houthi rebels, who are accused of being linked to Iran. The Journal also reports the Trump administration is seeking to resume sales of precision-guided weapons to Saudi Arabia. President Obama froze some of the weapons sales last year amidst concerns about the number of civilian casualties. The U.S.-backed Saudi-led bombing campaign has already killed thousands of people, while the Saudi naval blockade has pushed Yemen to the brink of famine. On Monday in Yemen, at least 11 people died in a suicide bombing attack on a government compound in southern Yemen. The Pentagon says North Korea carried out another rocket engine test on Friday. Pentagon officials say the rocket engine tests are part of North Korea's efforts to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile program. North Korea says the engine tests are part of the country's space program. Friday's test came as North Korea continues to condemn the ongoing joint military drills between the U.S. and South Korea. The annual exercises, which began on March 1st and will continue through April, include more than 300,000 South Korean soldiers and 17,000 U.S. troops, including members of SEAL Team 6. In Hong Kong, police have launched a crackdown on pro-democracy activists only one day after Beijing's preferred candidate was chosen to be the next leader of Hong Kong. At least 9 activists have been informed they are now facing charges for participation in pro-democracy street protests over 2 years ago. This is Professor Chan Kin-man, one of the founders of Hong Kong's Occupy Central protests, who is now facing charges.
I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's deliberate. I believe that they understood that it might invite backlash from the communities and affect the election campaign, and so that's why they wait until this morning. But I think they have sent a very bad signal to the community. When Carrie Lam said that she is going to mend the cleavages in the society, to bridge the divide, and now they are charging us, and I think it will further divide the society.
In Peru, the death toll from the country's worst flooding in more than 30 years is rising. At least 90 people have now died. The flooding caused by torrential downpours linked to climate change has also destroyed tens of thousands of houses and displaced more than 100,000 people. The floods have also destroyed thousands of roads, bridges, and highways across Peru, paralyzing commerce and making it harder to transport aid to affected regions. In French Guiana, dozens of unions launched a general strike Monday to protest unemployment, the cost of living, and the lack of public services in France's territory in South America. The general strike was the latest in a series of protests that have rocked the territory in recent weeks. On Monday, the French Prime Minister said he'd sent a delegation to French Guiana later in the week. The state of Michigan has reached a deal with the city of Flint, with the state agreeing to pay nearly $100 million to replace water lines to thousands of homes whose water has been poisoned by lead. Flint's water crisis began in 2014 after the unelected, state-appointed emergency manager for the city of Flint changed the source of the drinking water to the Flint River in order to try to save money. The river water corroded Flint's pipes, causing toxic lead to leach into the city's drinking water. Officials say Flint's water is still unsafe to drink without a filter, and many residents remain wary of drinking the water at all. On Monday, a white Army veteran who traveled from Baltimore to New York City to kill black men was indicted by a grand jury on the charge of murder as terrorism. Police say 28-year-old James Harris Jackson confessed to repeatedly plunging a sword into 66-year-old Timothy Kaufman, killing him. Police say Jackson was part of a white supremacist hate group in Baltimore. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer refused to answer questions about the case and refused to call it a hate crime. In Colorado, about 1,000 people congregated at a mosque in Fort Collins Sunday to show support after the mosque was vandalized earlier that morning. Police say they've arrested the man suspected of throwing rocks through the mosque's doors and then tossing a Bible inside. And anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Kathrada has died at the age of 87. Kathrada, better known as Kathy, was a member of the African National Congress. In 1963, he was arrested with other ANC leaders and went on to spend 26 years in prison, 18 of them on Robben Island. He later served as President Mandela's parliamentary advisor. This is Ahmed Kathrada speaking in Visby, Sweden in 2014.
Ours was historically a struggle for a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. That is what sent many people to prison, and that is for many, many of our colleagues lost their lives and were not alive to see the birth of democracy in our country.
That was Ahmed Kathrada speaking in 2014. He's died in Johannesburg at the age of 87. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The Trump administration has unveiled its latest attempt to target sanctuary cities that are refusing to help federal agents detain and deport undocumented immigrants. On Monday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the Justice Department would withhold billions of dollars in grants to law enforcement agencies in sanctuary cities.
The Department of Justice has a duty to enforce our nation's laws, including our immigration laws. Those laws require us to promptly remove aliens when they are convicted or detained of certain crimes. The vast majority of American people support this common sense requirement. According to one recent poll, 80% of Americans believe that cities that arrest illegal immigrants for crimes should be required to turn them over to immigration authorities. Unfortunately, some states and cities have adopted policies designed to frustrate this enforcement of immigration laws. This includes refusing to detain known felons under federal detainer request or otherwise failing to comply with these laws. For example, the Department of Homeland Security recently issued a report showing that in a single week, there were more than 200 instances of jurisdictions refusing to honor ICE detainer requests with respect to individuals charged or convicted of a serious crime. The charges and convictions against these aliens include drug trafficking, hit and run, rape, sex offenses against a child, and even murder.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions went on to explain that cities applying for grants will have to certify they are not providing sanctuary to undocumented immigrants. Today,
I'm urging states and local jurisdictions to comply with these federal laws, including 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. Moreover, the Department of Justice will require that jurisdictions seeking or applying for Department of Justice grants to certify compliance with 1373 as a condition of receiving those awards.
In response to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, Boston Mayor Martin Walsh, and others vowed to defy the order and remain sanctuary cities. Meanwhile, lawmakers from a number of sanctuary cities are gathering here in New York for a conference organized by the Center for Popular Democracy. We're joined right now by 3 people who are speaking at the conference. Helen Gim is with us, longtime community activist who was recently elected to the Philadelphia City Council. Gregorio Casar is an Austin City Council member. When he first won election in 2014, he was the youngest council member in Austin's history. He's the son of Mexican immigrants. Also with us, From New Haven is Michael Wishney, clinical professor of law at Yale Law School, co-director of the school's Worker and Immigrant Rights Advocacy Clinic. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Helen, let's begin with you. Philadelphia City Council member Helen Gim, your response to, well, we heard this yesterday at the session that you were involved with, where people came from around the country to talk about sanctuary, that Attorney General Jeff Sessions had just announced he would be going after cities that do what your city does, yes. Philadelphia.
Well, so what I'd say is that there's no surprise that 48 hours or 72 hours after the president suffers one of the most humiliating defeats in Congress ever, that they go back to their tried and true distractions, which is to scapegoat immigrants. And it's a tried and true practice. The American people have to reject it. They have rejected it. A week after the Women's March, for example, we got Muslim Ban 1. This is a nonstop attack on scapegoating immigrants in a divisive time for the administration to score political points. And what we're doing here in New York City is bringing together a broad cross-section of municipalities and localities. They're going to look at these threats, not with empty rhetoric, but with a real partnership and a network that's going to rely on some smart legal strategy. It's going to ask some serious questions. We're probably going to go into litigation over a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of questions about whether anything has actually changed or whether they're simply going on TV and hyping up the kinds of divisions that they hope to rely on in order to push through regressive agendas. But there's no question that cities are taking this very seriously, not through fear or submission, but by pushing back, fighting back, and making sure we're going to establish the networks and the organizing, and our communities are going to feel safe and truly strong.
And Helen, speaking about fighting back, you helped organize the protest at the Philadelphia airport during the Muslim Ban 1.0. Could you talk about that, what happened, and the success you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people understand very clearly what is going on, that this is an administration that's extraordinarily sloppy. They don't vet their own papers that they put out. Their executive orders are a mess. And similarly, we're not even sure that many things are changing between the Obama administration and the Trump administration on a legal front. But what we're doing is communities are paying attention to this. So when the executive order came down on the first Muslim ban, it came in the middle of the night, and it was left to the Customs and Border Patrol agents to figure this stuff out in airports all across the country. We put out a call on social media that there were a number of families being detained at the Philadelphia airport. And people came down by the hundreds. They came in through the hundreds, and because the people came, a U.S. senator came, our governor came, politicians followed, and the policies changed. And that's how people need to look at how we're going to push back against these larger threats.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Helen Gim is a Philadelphia City Council member. We'll also speak with Gregorio Casard, the youngest ever Austin City Council member, and Michael Wishney, telling a remarkable story about organizing against ICE a decade ago in New Haven. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
A Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or spy? Would you harbor a runaway woman or child, a poet, a prophet, a king? Would you harbor an exile or a refugee, a person living with AIDS? Would you harbor a Tubman, a Garrett, a Truth, a fugitive, or a slave? Would you harbor a Haitian, Korean, or Czech, a lesbian, or a gay? Would you harbor a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or
Would You Harbor Me by Sweet Honey in the Rock. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, I wanted to talk to Councilman Kassar about what happened recently in Austin, especially with your sheriff. Last week in Texas, U.S. Magistrate Judge Andrew Austin said in open court that federal agents had alerted him that ICE would be targeting the area of Austin, Texas. The raids would be retribution for Travis County Sheriff Sally Hernandez's new policy that limited cooperation between local and federal authorities. This is a courtroom recording of ICE agent Laren Bryant being questioned by Judge Austin.
There's been questions about whether Austin's being targeted. Your immediate supervisor, I guess, Agent Schaefer,
yes, sir.
Came and briefed me and the magistrate judge, Judge Lane, that at the very end of January that we could expect a big operation, or agents coming in from out of town. There was going to be a specific operation, and it was at least related to us in that meeting that it was a result of the sheriff's new policy that this was going to happen. Are you aware of that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And that's the one we've heard about where 50-some-odd people were arrested?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. My understanding is what was told us is one of the reasons that happened is because the meetings that had occurred between the field office director and the sheriff didn't go very well.
That's new knowledge to me.
Above your pay grade?
Yes, yes.
So that was the discussion in court, in open court. Greg Kassar, what has been going on with Sally Hernandez, the sheriff there, and what's been the attempts of the state as well to stop the efforts of lawmakers and elected officials in Austin to maintain a sanctuary city?
Well, what we're facing is repression and retaliation against an almost decade-long campaign to become a welcoming city, a truly welcoming city for our immigrant communities. So for years, our previous sheriff was deporting more people, helping in deportation of more people than almost any other sheriff in the country. And finally, because of campaigns at the city to stop collaborating and cooperating with the county, campaigns to push that sheriff out, we finally elected a new sheriff. And on the same day of Trump's inauguration, she announced a policy to significantly reduce our compliance with voluntary ICE detainers. It was very shortly thereafter that our governor said he was going to put the hammer down against Austin. He pulled over $1.5 million in funds that were there to protect children and veterans in our community, but we resisted and we stood strong. And soon thereafter, we heard there was going to be a targeted ICE operation against our community. And in one weekend, over 50 people were arrested. And ICE denied that there was even an operation going on. And once we called them out on that, they denied that it was an operation sweeping up large numbers of people. They said they were targeting folks. But it soon became very clear, because of my own constituents were being picked up, that over half the people that they picked up had no criminal history at all and were on no list whatsoever. And finally, when we called that political retaliation, that is politically motivated law enforcement actions that had nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with Trump's agenda, ICE denied that vigorously, and now in open court, a judge has confirmed what we all know, which is that, unfortunately, we have a rogue federal agency that is not only tearing families apart, but threatening our very democracy by taking public safety actions and arresting people for political purposes.
You have the second highest undocumented population in the country in Texas, only next to California.
That's right. And what makes us different than California is that we are governed by a statewide regime that is aligned with Trump's politics of mass deportation. And so a bill has been filed. Now, because they couldn't pull enough money away to make us submit, they couldn't send enough ICE agents into our communities to make us submit. Now they have filed a bill that has passed through the Senate and is now being deliberated by our state House to criminalize city elected leaders and county elected leaders who endorse policies that don't turn our police officers into deportation officers or who won't comply with voluntary ICE detainers. And so they are looking at taking away tens or hundreds of millions of dollars away from our cities and from actually criminalizing those elected officials who refuse to submit. And we're going to continue to refuse to submit no matter what Jeff Sessions or Greg Abbott has to say about it.
So in other words, if they pass this bill, Sally Hernandez, the sheriff, or you as a council member could be arrested under the new laws that they're proposing to pass.
But while that is terrifying on its face, the fact of the matter is, I believe it's not only unethical and un-American, but also unlawful. And so that's part of why we, as council members from over 30 cities, came together in New York these last couple of days to start planning for our litigation strategies and our political strategies so that we can't be blackmailed and singled out as individual cities, but indeed they would have to be coming after a huge swath of the American public that live in our progressive strongholds in our cities.
Well, I'd like to bring Michael Wishney in here from Yale Law School. You actually told a very important story at the conference yesterday about a battle that occurred 10 years ago under the Obama administration in terms of ICE and attempts to punish a city for becoming more welcoming to immigrants. I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. Actually, it was the Bush administration, though, I should say.
I'm sorry, the Bush administration.
So, in the city of New Haven in 2006, community organizations working with students at the law school developed a set of proposals for policies to make New Haven more welcoming and to improve police-civilian relationships, especially in high immigrant neighborhoods. One of the recommendations from the community was that the city adopt a general-purpose municipal identification card available to any resident who wanted one. In the spring of 2007, the mayor proposed and the city council, which we call the Board of Alders, overwhelmingly approved the nation's first general-purpose municipal ID program. 48 hours after the vote in City Council, in June of 2007, ICE conducted the largest raid, we believe, in the history of our state. They came in the pre-dawn hours. They amassed a force of all federal agents they could find from different agencies all over the state. They swept into Fairhaven, which is a heavily Latino neighborhood in the eastern part of the city, going door to door, apartment to apartment, kicking down doors, pushing their way in without warrants, without consent. They arrested 32 people in all, parents getting up in the morning, preparing to go to work, to take their children to school. Later, ICE claimed that they were looking for particular dangerous, fugitive criminal aliens. But it turned out, of course, that of the 32 people they arrested, almost all of them had never before encountered immigration. They were just bystanders who happened to be living in an apartment where ICE thought someone used to be, or the apartment upstairs, or the house next door. This was a terrifying moment, most of all for the families, but for the community as a whole. But the community rallied. ICE scattered the 32 people in jails around New England, in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, trying to hide them. But we were able to find 31 of the 32 people, and the students in the clinic offered representation to 30 of them. Remarkably, all 30 of those people came home. We were able to get bond set by the courts. The community raised the money to post bond, and in the first mass raid of its time, this had ever happened, people came home. They came back to their families, they came back to their communities, and they had an opportunity to decide whether to fight their deportation cases and to tell the stories of what had happened. Well, in the end, most of the people decided to fight their cases. A few decided not to. And of those who fought their deportation cases, every single one of them won, with one exception, a case that's still pending now in federal court in New York. But everybody else persuaded the immigration judges, excuse me, to dismiss their cases based on ICE's illegal and retaliatory raid against the city of New Haven. But that wasn't all. The community groups went to court in 6 state and federal Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, and they obtained the email traffic and the planning documents that showed ICE was secretly and actively plotting to try to stifle the municipal ID card. They didn't like it, they wanted to stop it, and when they couldn't stop the city, they took retaliation on a group of households in one neighborhood. Well, once we obtained those records and shared them with the public, many of those arrested then brought a civil rights action in federal court against ICE for Fourth Amendment violations, for racial profiling, for retaliating against the city of New Haven. And ICE settled that lawsuit by paying $350,000 to people who had been arrested and offering a menu of immigration relief. Different individuals could choose different items. So the net result of this action was that 2 people were deported, ICE paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to those who'd been wrongfully arrested, and everyone's case was dismissed or they secured relief, again, with this one exception that we're still in court on. And just to close the story, this raid happened 2 days after the city council vote. At that time, the municipal ID card program had not begun, of course. And after the raids, Mayor DeStefano, who was mayor, asked the community whether he should delay the ID card program, whether to actually implement it would simply provoke more immigration raids, more retaliation, more unlawful activity. And he didn't want to harm the community. But the community groups who had led the fight, Junta for Progressive Action, Unidad Latina en Acción, they said, no, you should go forward. People will still come out. This is still a useful program. And in July, about 2 months after the raid, the card program launched. I didn't know if anyone was going to come, but I still remember vividly the first day. People came early in the morning. They lined up outside of City Hall, standing in line, dressed for work, dressed for school. The next day, the line was even longer, and by the third day, it snaked out of City Hall and around the block. Hundreds of people standing in line at 7 in the morning, waiting for nothing more than a small piece of paper laminated that said, I'm a person. I live in New Haven. So I'm sorry to hear the account of what's happening in Texas and in Austin right now. I've been in touch with civil rights lawyers in Austin who have learned from our experience and learned how the community responded and how the lawyers supported that community response. I hope it doesn't come to that point in Austin. I hope that there can be a resolution that protects community and public safety. But if not, we hope there may be some lessons to be drawn from our experience here in New Haven.
Well, I want to just briefly, if you could tell us, this was actually clearly an illegal operation by the federal government 10 years ago. You've made the point that a lot of what's coming out of the Trump administration in terms of retribution against sanctuary cities is itself illegal and that these cities are acting legally. Could you briefly talk about that?
Yes, just briefly. I mean, at some level, reading Attorney General Sessions' comments yesterday, I just thought these are the guys who can't shoot straight. They put out this report last week about cities that they say are not in compliance with laws. One of the cities they listed in their report last week was the city of East Haven, Connecticut, right next door to New Haven. East Haven does have a policy limiting information sharing, limiting arrests, prohibiting detainer enforcement. And last week they were listed as one of these targeted jurisdictions, I guess, for loss of funding. The thing, though, is that East Haven has those policies because of a consent decree that they are subject to, that the U.S. Department of Justice approved. They have a set of policies that prohibit enforcement of detainers and prohibit information sharing with ICE that the Department of Justice signed off on and approved, and they're under court order. And now the Department of Justice wants to take millions of dollars away from their police because they went along with a Department of Justice approved court decree. Other cities have followed East Haven and have adopted the same policies that the U.S. Department of Justice has approved as lawful. So these guys think that they know better than local police departments and sheriff departments what constitutes public safety. But they are seeking to deprive local jurisdictions of dollars based on policies that are lawful, as adopted by the local jurisdictions, and in a manner at the federal level that is plainly unlawful. And I regret that it will take perhaps years of litigation to establish that, and there will be stress and pain in the interim. But I don't think the federal government will succeed in depriving local cities of police money because those cities are following the Constitution.
I wanted to bring Helen Gim back into this conversation and talk about the effects right now of the fear in communities. I was just talking to a Baltimore city councilman who said something like 20 to 30% of the kids in schools are not coming in certain Baltimore schools because they are terrified, even those that are not undocumented, that they will be mistaken for that and could possibly be taken away. But the issue across the board, landlords threatening to use ICE to evict tenants, businesses not paying, threatening the workers with ICE. Can you talk about examples of both of these?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that we recently held a gathering of school district parents to talk specifically about immigration issues. issues that they were facing, and more than 500 people came to that meeting to talk directly with our school officials about what it felt like to be an immigrant family under this administration. And in particular, one of the things we have to remember is that 1 in 10 American families is of mixed status. So when people talk about going after undocumented folks, what they're really talking about is going after American families. You're talking about somebody's son or daughter or a parent or a sister or brother or a grandparent. So these are very serious issues. The most things that we're seeing is that abuses against undocumented folks are overwhelmingly abuses that happen across the spectrum for exploitive purposes. That specifically includes our attention that we've been paying to evictions in the city of Philadelphia, where more than 1 in 14 renters, for example, face eviction in our city. We see unscrupulous landlords going after people, threatening them. We have seen cases...
So they'll say, we'll bring in ICE if you don't leave?
We've heard cases where people are just being threatened and asking for documentation when they're clearly not able or should be in a position to ask for any of those things, and they clearly violate our Commission on Human Relations Acts. We've also seen worries about workers being exploited. We recently passed, for example, a wage theft law in Philadelphia to make sure that workers would be protected. But in particular, people need to understand that the threats against the undocumented are really threats across the spectrum that impact a lot of people in vulnerable areas of American society. And we really need to stand up around housing, around labor laws, school district issues.
What about domestic violence? Women afraid to come forward?
And I think we've seen some shocking statistics already out of a number of different cities. We'll probably be looking at what we're seeing in Philadelphia. But clearly, women who are victims of rape and sexual assault, women who are afraid to press charges against a spouse or a boyfriend or somebody else are afraid to go to the police. And this is a vital concern. This is why cities have enacted these policies. They don't come out of thin air. They actually come out of the fact that we've had long experiences doing ICE's work for them. And when that happens, we suffer tremendous consequences, among them being the fact that immigrants are afraid to report crime, among them that immigrants don't feel comfortable going to school, and that in an administration that is not making any distinction or practicing any level of discretion between legal and undocumented, between good immigrants and bad immigrants, they are purporting out stories that give you the sense that that all immigrants are to be worried about, because no one really knows what people's status are, and that is a very, very complicated thing, not to be left in the hands of individuals. This needs to be an issue, and that's why we need to push into the political arena, and we need to be very present as much as we are in the legal arena.
And Greg, just briefly, we only have a few seconds. In Austin, you have not just a large undocumented population. You have a large population of Mexican-American citizens and legal residents. What's been the reaction of the general Latino community in Austin to this clampdown by ICE and the Trump administration?
While there has been real fear instilled in the community and legitimate fear, we've also seen a surge of resistance and backlash. And if we want to help the communities that are most targeted and most vulnerable, we have to turn the pain and fear felt in those communities into action. And that's what you're seeing in the ICE operations I talked about earlier. Instead of people hiding in their homes after those operations occurred, we had 7 days of protesting all night and all day, and of student walkouts of Latino communities, be they documented, undocumented, or mixed status, standing together to fight back. Because ultimately what they're trying to do, these deportation actions are not just about xenophobia. They're about maintaining political power and repressing our communities, and you're seeing our communities do the exact opposite. And I couldn't be prouder than to represent folks that are willing to take those sorts of risks.
And Governor Abbott's response to your pushback?
He has, continues to get his chance to be on Fox News and to be a national voice and to say he's going to remove elected officials from office. And I don't know who died and made him Putin, but the fact of the matter is this is a democratic society, and Texans, I think, do believe in fair representation. So even though Trump may have won our electoral college votes, I don't think he won the hearts and minds of everyday Texans, and I think you saw that come forward after the repressive actions by ICE.
Well, this is a conversation we will certainly continue. I want to thank you all for being with us. Helen Gim is a Philadelphia City Council member. Gregorio Casar is the youngest ever Austin City Council member. And Michael Wishney joining us from Yale University, law professor at Yale Law School. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, Rebecca Solnit on the mother of all questions. Stay with us.
Thank you. Said you're gonna shoot me down, put my body in the river. Shoot me down, put my body in the river, and the whole world sings. Sing it like a song. The whole world sings like there's nothing going wrong. He shot her down, he put her body in the river. He covered her up, but I went to get her, and I said, my girl, what happened to you now? I said, my girl, we gotta stop it somehow. Tell me what's a man with a rifle in his hand gonna do for a world that's so sick and sad? And tell me what's a man with a rifle in his hand gonna do for a world that's all gone mad? He's gonna shoot me down, put my body in the river, and cover me up with the leaves of September like an old sad song. You heard it all before. Well, Delia's gone, but I'm settling the score.
The Body Electric by Linda Segarra of Hooray for the Riff Raff, singing here at Democracy Now! Studios. To see our full interview with Linda and her full performance, go to democracynow.org. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, President Trump is expected to sign an executive order today to dismantle a slew of climate rules put in place by President Obama. The executive order marks the first step to undo Obama's Clean Power Plan to limit power plant emissions. The rule was seen as a critical element of the U.S. pledge to cut emissions as part of the 2015 Paris Accord. Trump's executive order is also expected to scrap regulations limiting methane emissions and open up the door for more coal mining and fracking on federal lands. In addition, the executive order is expected to end entirely President Obama's 2013 Climate Action Plan, which outlined the federal government's approach to curbing climate change.
We spend the rest of the hour with one of the nation's most celebrated writers, Rebecca Solnit, who's written about climate change for years, including one widely read essay headlined, "Call Climate Change What It Is, Violence." She wrote, "Climate change is global-scale violence against places and species as well as against human beings. Once we call it by name, we can start having a real conversation about our priorities and values, because the revolt against brutality begins with a revolt against the language that hides that brutality." Rebecca Solnit is author of more than 20 books, most recently The Mother of All Questions. She's also a columnist at Harper's Magazine. It's nice to have you back, Rebecca. Can you start off by talking about climate change and this dismantling of legislation that so many found wanting even during the Obama years, but President Trump dismantling that?
First of all, anybody who's surprised wasn't paying attention even before the election. But I know Bill McKibben talked about a little bit yesterday that the dropping price of renewables is inexorable. Natural gas has sort of aced out coal for a while. But which doesn't mean that it isn't terrible. And it is really painful for me this morning to hear this news. But, you know, we'll fight. And one of the things, speaking as a Californian, during the Bush administration, a lot of decision-making about climate devolved to the states. And, California had to fight the Bush administration on setting emission standards for cars. Even more than we were in that era, we're going to fight. We're going to set emission standards. We're going to lead on moving away from fossil fuel. And there's a lot of different scales. There's an international scale, local scales, state scales. People can continue to work on while resisting this administration, but knowing that at best we can prevent them from doing things, not get them to do great climate work. Or maybe at best that we can topple them soon, to jump ahead a little.
Well, you've written a lot about what resistance can look like under President Trump. What's your message for a lot of people who continue to feel demoralized as they see the news day by day of new initiatives of this administration?
I think the resistance that arose immediately after the election and that continues to be active on immigration and human rights and climate and everything else is extraordinary and powerful and like nothing I've ever seen. What concerns me, and after 30 years of activism, is that a lot of people will think, well, we did something today and we didn't see results tomorrow. So one of the things I've been writing about for The Guardian and elsewhere is just trying to remind people that this is a long process, that we may be in, the early stages of really redefining what democracy is going to mean in this nation, reforming the systems that were already moribund and stagnant before. Trump is a consequence of a dysfunctional system, not a cause of it. So we have enormous transformative work to do. And people are actually doing it. If we keep at it, if we're smart, if we're skillful, if we're more passionate about solidarity than the kind of perfectionism of nitpicking small differences, I think that extraordinary things could happen. Not that they're guaranteed. It depends on what we do. But it's an exciting and even exhilarating moment as well as a heartrending and terrifying one. And those things can coexist.
Talk about the actual resistance, whether we're talking about the day after President Trump's inauguration, where at least 3 times the number of people came out, same place, same, period of time, and that was women, the Women's March for Washington. Among the issues they were raising, certainly climate change and many others, reproductive rights. And it wasn't a couple of days before President Trump issued an executive order, a gag order, which sort of might have been noticed by many. The women come out and speak, and then he issues a gag order that says, internationally, women's groups, health organizations could not only provide abortion, but even talk about it as an option or lose their funding.
It's funny, when you said gag order, I was thinking about the gag order preventing, I think it was the EPA, from talking about climate. There's a lot of gag orders coming out of this administration, a lot of people they're trying to silence in a lot of ways. But people are fearless. I thought this might be like the moment, the months and years after 9/11, where people were really intimidated, and it felt like a small minority of us were speaking up. There are so many people speaking up. There's 6,000 at least indivisible groups that have formed to try and influence and lobby their politicians. There's a lot of new groups and a lot of support for existing groups around immigration and human rights, refugees, protecting Muslims. The healthcare debate was partly a debate about whether women are human beings, which they clearly didn't think, as all those men were saying, like, why should we fund mammograms? Why should we cover pregnancy, et cetera? So,
as if men had nothing to do with pregnancy.
Men who were not born of women maybe don't. And they can step forward now. But it's, I still feel like we need to address what connects all these things, what common basis of egalitarianism, humanism, compassion, nonviolence we might connect all these issues with as we go forward. But the resistance really is extraordinary on all these things. And it's states, it's the judicial department, not in all cases, but in many cases, religious groups, and a lot of people inside the federal government, and the immediate appearance of sort of alt-national parks, alt-EPA, rogue NASA, was really exciting. And one of the things that fascinates me about all this, too, is that the only power a president has is to give orders, and that's only a power if those orders are obeyed. And you can see that it's not a sure system anymore. It's really crumbling in a lot of ways as he loses respect, loses belief.
I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned states. You've been a longtime resident of California, which is a state right now that is the polar opposite of what is happening in Washington, D.C. Could you talk about what California is doing and how it might still be able to affect especially when it comes to climate change, the national conversation and policies?
Yeah, the day after the election, Kevin DeLeon, the president of the state Senate, and his colleague in the lower house issued a proclamation of defiance, and it was bilingual as part of the defiance. It was a beautiful thing. Jerry Brown, who still needs to stop fracking in California, but, has also been really openly and fearlessly defiant. We're a huge state. We're one of the largest economies in the world. We're really far away from Washington. We're a Latino majority state at this point, and we set our own policy and in a lot of ways. And when we do things, it tends to lead the rest of the country, partly, because we're so big, there's that kind of impact. We're trying to set new emission standards. We're moving towards renewable, energy policy statewide that will make most of the state run on renewables. Cities like San Diego have already committed to go 100% renewable. So we're really carrying on according to our own beliefs and not letting them interfere with us that much.
I mean, Kevin DeLeon is talking about making the state a sanctuary state.
Which is a beautiful thing, and I find him an incredibly exciting politician as a climate activist, a feminist, an immigrant rights champion, a Latino leader, and hope to see him continue to rise.
You have also written about the war within the Republican Party, talking about everything that's happened in the last few days with the failure of Trump Care.
Yeah, I think that both parties are in different kinds of crisis, but the Republican Party is kind of in a fascinating, it's sort of fracturing, and you can see all these people who don't seem to have a lot of principle decide, is it safer to go with Trump or to go against him? At some point, I think it's going to be in free fall, and the rats will be scurrying off the sinking ship. But, he's also saying we have a lot of old guard people like Lindsey Graham and John McCain who've been outspoken about the collusion with Russia. And it's just a really strange moment. What do they stand for? I feel like the Republican Party's always been kind of sneaky and disguised and dog whistle enabled. And now it's all kind of naked and hanging out there for the public to see. And Trump has sort of taken all the things they said they were for and taken them to an extreme. There's a lot of room for outsiders, the Democratic Party, should they ever find leadership, media people, et cetera, to really drive wedges through them. And the Democrats are doing some great things like making them vote weekly on whether Trump should reveal his taxes and kind of putting them on the record, which could impact a lot of Congress people in the midterms.
I wanted to ask you about your latest of your many books, Mother of All Questions. What is the Mother of All Questions?
That's the title of an essay I wrote about the kinds of questions women get asked all the time. Why don't you have kids? The assumption, and questions like that assume that women are just sort of breeding units, that all women are the same, that happiness can only come from domesticity and family life and reproduction, and that women's private lives are public business. And, and it's really part of a larger business of telling people what a good life consists of, that you're supposed to have lots of sex, be married, have kids, and then have lots of toys and money and et cetera. And we all know that lots of people have those things and aren't happy, and that lots of people don't have those things. I hang out with a lot of celibate Buddhist priests and abbesses and things who are really pretty happy people who don't have any of those things. So it's really a revolt against the formulas and the questions that aren't real questions interested in understanding more deeply, but that are really trying to shame people and hurt, push them back into the herd, force them to conform.
We're going to do part 2 of this conversation after this broadcast. We'll post it online at democracynow.org. And I want to ask you about women and sometimes men being silenced, what that silence means, and the difference between silence and quiet. That's just some of the questions we'll ask Rebecca Solnit. Rebecca Solnit, writer, historian, activist, author of 20 books, including most recently The Mother of All Questions. She's also a columnist at Harper's Magazine. Her most recent piece we'll link to in The Guardian, Protest and Persist, Why Giving Up Hope is Not an Option. This is Democracy Now! By the way, we have a full-time news production fellowship. Visit our website for democracynow.org. For more information, you have to apply immediately. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gaddis, Diener, Sam Malkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura, Andre Lewis. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.